Your disabled mother is ruining our lives. Put her in a nursing home. Or I'll do it myself. My mother-in-law hissed at the housewarming party for the apartment my mother bought. The guests fell silent, and my mother calmly uttered 3 words that left everyone aghast. Hello, dear listeners. You're on the Hidden Revenge Stories channel. Today, we'll dive into a gripping tale of family secrets, cunning schemes, and a fight for what rightfully belongs. Imagine an unexpected inheritance, a dream apartment in the city center, and a mother-in-law whose concern turns out to be just a cover for a cunning plan. This is a story of how greed for another's property can destroy everything. And the truth, spoken at the right moment, can turn the tables. Make yourselves comfortable. A tense plot awaits you. Enjoy listening and stay healthy. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and be sure to hit like so you don't miss new stories. When Mom called me Thursday morning and said, "Honey, get ready, we're going to look at an apartment," I almost dropped the phone. What apartment? We didn't have much extra money. And suddenly she was talking about buying a home. Mom, did you win the lottery? I laughed, continuing to wash dishes after breakfast. Even better. Do you remember Aunt Clara? I tensed. Aunt Clara was my mom's cousin, with whom they hadn't spoken in about 25 years. The last time I saw her was in my childhood, when I was about 8. A tall, strict woman with gray hair who always wore black dresses and spoke very softly. Yes, I remember. What about her? She died a year ago. And yesterday a notary called me. It turns out she bequeathed me her 3-bedroom apartment in the city center. I froze with a wet plate in my hands. An inheritance from Aunt Clara. It was so unexpected that I couldn't believe it. Mom, are you sure this isn't a scam? I've already been to the notary. Checked all the documents. Everything is legitimate. The apartment is ours. 2 hours later, we were riding a bus down Main Street. Mom was nervous, constantly adjusting her prosthesis. After an accident 3 years ago, her left leg had been amputated above the knee. I saw how worried she was about the long journey, the stairs in the building. But her eyes gleamed with anticipation. You know, Lizzie, she said, looking out the window, maybe this is a sign that it's time for us to live separately from David's mother? I sighed. My mother-in-law, Susan, was indeed not a pleasant person. We had been living 3 together in my husband David's 2-bedroom apartment for 4 years since our wedding. And all those 4 years I felt like not the hostess, but rather an inconvenient guest. Susan constantly made it clear to me that I cooked incorrectly, cleaned poorly, and with my mother, a disabled person, I generally tormented the whole family. The house turned out to be old, but sturdy, a 5-story building of classic construction with high ceilings. There was no elevator, but Mom managed the 3rd floor, albeit with difficulty. The apartment simply amazed me. Huge rooms, a large kitchen, 2 bathrooms. In the main room stood an old piano, covered in dust, and on the walls hung paintings in heavy frames. Everything was neat, but it was clear that the owner lived here alone and hadn't changed much in 20 years. Mom, this is a palace, I whispered, walking across the creaking parquet floor. And it's all ours. Mom smiled, leaning on her cane. Imagine, you'll have your own room. I'll have mine, and David will have an office for work. I hugged her very, very tightly. For the first time in many years, I felt like we would have a real home, not someone else's corner where you have to tiptoe and apologize for every sound. The move took 2 weeks. David reacted calmly to the news. Even happy, he had long dreamed of moving out of his mother's house. But he had no money for his own home. And here was such a gift from fate. Your mom is a magician, he said, helping to carry boxes. Honestly, I thought we'd live our whole lives with Mom. Susan reacted strangely to our move. At first, she was offended that we were abandoning her. Then she began to say that the apartment had bad energy since an old lonely woman lived there. And then she suddenly announced that she wanted to see our new home. Maybe I should think about moving too, she said thoughtfully. The area is good, central. We settled in gradually. We bought furniture little by little with David's salary and my disability pension. My mom blossomed literally before my eyes. She got her own large room with a balcony, where she set up a mini conservatory. For the first time in years, I could cook in the kitchen without fear that someone would criticize my every move. David also transformed. He began to come home with pleasure, not like to hard labor. In the evenings, the 3 of us sat at a large table, drank tea, and made plans. It seemed that life had finally settled down. But everything changed in 1 second. On Saturday morning, Susan called me, sobbing. Lizzie, I'm in trouble, she cried into the phone. Upstairs neighbors burst a pipe. Water has been pouring for 2 days already. Flooded my apartment and the downstairs neighbors. Everything is floating. Ceilings collapsed. Floors buckled. Can't live there. I ran to Mom in the kitchen. What happened? Mom asked, frightened. Seeing my face, my mother-in-law had a serious flood. An hour later, Susan stood at our doorstep with 2 huge suitcases and tear-filled eyes. She looked truly awful, covered in dust, hair disheveled, clothes stained with plaster. Lizzie, darling, can I stay with you for a bit? She pleaded piteously. Just for a little while. Until they finish the repairs. A month at most. What could I say? Of course. I agreed. Mom nodded too. We're not monsters to abandon someone in trouble. Of course. Susan, make yourself at home in David's room. We'll sleep on the couch in the living room for now. You're so kind. My mother-in-law clapped her hands. I promise I'll be quick. As soon as I get the insurance money and the repairs are done. I'll leave right away. The first few days she really behaved as meek as a lamb. Constantly apologizing, offering to help with chores, praising the apartment, saying how wonderful we are to shelter her. It's so cozy here, she admired, looking around the living room. And the ceilings are high. And the rooms are spacious. Just like in old movies. Mom smiled, and I felt some uneasiness. Something in my mother-in-law's behavior was alarming. She was too kind and enthusiastic. Not like her, but I attributed my suspicions to fatigue and stress. After all, the woman was in distress. Her apartment was destroyed, and she had to ask strangers for shelter. Naturally, she tried to be as polite as possible. A week later, Susan felt completely at home. She began to express opinions on how best to arrange furniture, what curtains to buy, where to hang paintings. Mom winced but kept silent. And I tried to gently steer the conversation to another topic. Susan, how are the repairs coming along? I asked once at dinner. Are you already processing the insurance claim? Oh, honey, such a hassle. My mother-in-law waved her hand. They need all sorts of expert evaluations. Appraisals. They say it might drag on for 2 or 3 months. 2 or 3 months. I imagined with horror how we would live all together for so long. The apartment, though large, made it difficult to get used to my mother-in-law's constant presence again. And then something happened that finally knocked me off balance. Monday morning, I got out of the shower and heard strange male voices in the hallway. I quickly dressed and ran out to see what was happening. In the hallway stood 2 men in work clothes with some measuring instruments. And next to them was my mother-in-law in a bathrobe. Explaining something animatedly to them. And here the wall can be removed, she said, pointing to the partition between the kitchen and the living room. It will make a studio. That's very fashionable now, Susan, I called out, confused. What's going on? She flinched and turned to me with a guilty smile. Oh, Lizzie, you're awake. These are designers. I'm thinking, maybe we can do a small renovation in the apartment. It's all so old-fashioned. What renovation? I don't understand. In our apartment? Well, yes, my mother-in-law said. Surprised. Where else? I don't have my own place yet. I thought we'd discuss together how best to redo it. We can knock down walls. Create zoning. The men exchanged glances and began to pack up their tools. We'll call you back later. One of them mumbled. When you've decided. I escorted them to the door. And then turned to my mother-in-law. Inside, everything boiled with indignation. Susan, how could you call strangers without our permission? This is our apartment. Well, of course it's yours. She agreed, but I'm also living here temporarily. And besides, wouldn't it be nice to have a beautiful renovation at my expense, of course? We don't want any renovation, I said firmly. We like everything as it is. My mother-in-law looked at me with bewilderment, as if I had said something completely unreasonable. Lizzie, why are you acting like a child? This is an improvement to living conditions. Think about the future. At that moment, Mom wheeled out of her room. After long walks around the apartment, it was hard for her to walk on her prosthesis. So at home she often used a wheelchair. What's all the noise? She asked, looking at us. Well, Susan decided to renovate our apartment, I said sarcastically. Without asking, Mom looked at my mother-in-law carefully. Susan, you understand that this is not your apartment. You are a guest here. Of course, I understand. My mother-in-law quickly agreed. I only meant well. I wanted to make it beautiful for everyone. But I saw something else in her eyes. Not remorse, but rather annoyance that her plans had been revealed too soon. In the evening, when David came home from work, I told him what had happened. He was also not thrilled. Mom, how could you do that? He reproachfully told his mother at dinner. This is someone else's apartment. David, I only meant well. Susan justified herself. Imagine how beautiful it would be. A studio. Modern renovation. Mom, that's enough. David said tiredly. We won't be redoing anything and don't call anyone else without our permission. My mother-in-law pouted and remained silent all evening, feigning offended innocence, and I lay on the couch next to David that night, wondering what else she had managed to do when we weren't looking. In the morning, my suspicions were confirmed. While Mom was sleeping and David had gone to work, I decided to walk around the apartment and see if the designers from yesterday had left any traces of their presence. In Mom's room, on the windowsill, I discovered strange marks. Someone had measured the windows. In the living room, on the wall, some diagrams were drawn in pencil that I hadn't noticed before. And in the kitchen, behind the refrigerator, lay a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it and felt a chill. It was a draft estimate for renovation work. Demolition of walls, laying laminate flooring, painting, new plumbing. The sum was astronomical, but money wasn't the issue. At the very top of the sheet was written, redevelopment for SF Crawford. Main Street, House 15, Apt 23, Crawford. Crawford was Susan's maiden name. And the address was ours. So she had been planning this renovation for a long time and was presenting our designers as her own apartment. I clenched the paper in my fist. So that's what it was. There was no accidental flood. Or there was, but my mother-in-law decided to take advantage of it. She deliberately moved in with us not as a temporary guest, but as a future hostess. At that moment, the kitchen door opened, and Susan herself appeared in a bathrobe. Lizzie, good morning. What's that in your hands? I slowly unfolded the crumpled paper and showed it to her. This, Susan, can you explain what your last name means on the renovation estimate for our apartment? My mother-in-law's face changed instantly. The sickly sweet smile disappeared. Her eyes became hard and cold. I don't know what you're talking about, she said dryly. Probably some mistake. What mistake? I persisted. You ordered this project yourself. Prove it, my mother-in-law defiantly replied. And at that moment I realized. The war was just beginning. Susan was not going to leave in a month at all. She had come seriously and for a long time and already considered this apartment her own. After our conversation in the kitchen, my relationship with Susan changed dramatically. She no longer played the role of a grateful guest. The mask fell, and I saw her true face. Cold, calculating, full of hidden aggression. David, of course, tried to smooth over the conflict. In the evening, he talked to his mother for a long time, explaining that it couldn't be done like that. Susan nodded, apologized, promised not to interfere in our affairs anymore. But I saw no remorse in her eyes. Lizzie, just give her a chance. David pleaded with me as we went to bed. She understood that she was wrong. David, you saw that estimate. She didn't make a mistake. She planned it. Maybe she just wanted to do something nice? I sighed heavily. My husband thought too highly of people. Especially his mother. He couldn't believe she was capable of deceit. The next day, I specifically took a day off from work. Officially, to help Mom settle into the new apartment. In reality, to keep an eye on my mother-in-law. In the morning, Susan busied herself in the kitchen for a long time, drinking coffee, flipping through some magazines, then suddenly announced that she was going to the clinic to check her blood pressure. Does the doctor see patients at 10 o'clock? I asked innocently. 11 o'clock, my mother-in-law replied without blinking. But I want to get there early to wait in line. Half an hour after she left, I went down to the yard and hid behind the corner of the house. If she really went to the doctor, she would head towards the bus stop. The clinic was in another district. But Susan turned in the opposite direction towards the square. And there, by the fountain, a young man in a business suit with a folder in his hands was already waiting for her. I cautiously approached closer, hiding behind an ice cream kiosk. It was hard to hear, but individual phrases reached me. Property documents, the man said. Estimated cost, my mother-in-law replied. Sale options. My blood ran cold. So I was right. Susan was meeting with a realtor, discussing the sale of our apartment. I tried to get even closer. But at that moment the man said something to my mother-in-law. And she sharply turned in my direction. I had to quickly step back around the corner. When I looked out again, they were already parting ways. Susan was walking back towards our house. And the realtor was getting into a black car. Susan arrived home exactly at 1 p.m. Just when the clinic appointment should have ended. So, how's the blood pressure? I asked, looking her straight in the eye. Normal, she replied without blinking. The doctor said there's nothing to worry about. And did you wait long in line? Terribly long. Can you imagine? I sat there for 2 hours. And I caught her in a lie. But what was the point? David wouldn't believe it anyway. In the evening at dinner, I tried to subtly bring up the topic of apartment sales. Do you know what the housing prices are like in our area right now? I asked Susan casually. She tensed, but answered calmly. How would I know? I'm not planning to buy. What about selling? I didn't give up. I have nothing to sell. My apartment is flooded. Did you forget? Mom listened attentively to our conversation. I noticed her frown. Susan, what does the insurance company say? Mom asked. When will you start the repairs? My mother-in-law hesitated. They're still conducting an expert evaluation there. Assessing the damage. It's a long procedure. Can I have the phone number of the management company? Mom persisted. I have a friend who was in a similar situation. Maybe she can suggest how to speed things up. No need, Susan replied sharply. I'll handle it myself. After dinner, Mom asked me to help her in her room. When we were alone, she quietly said, Lizzie, I think your mother-in-law is exaggerating the extent of the flood. Why do you think so? Because today I called Mrs. Taylor. She lives in the same building, one floor above Susan. I asked about the pipe accident. So, Mrs. Taylor says it did burst. But the water only flowed for half a day until the plumbers shut it off. There was no serious damage. Just leaks on the ceiling. I sat on the edge of Mom's bed. So there was no flood after all. Or there was, but not that serious. And Susan just took advantage of the situation. Mom, guard the apartment documents carefully. I'll put the most important ones in a safe deposit box at the bank. And leave only copies at home. And make sure she doesn't sign anything on your behalf or mine. The following week, Susan became even more active. Every day she would leave on errands, return with a mysterious look. And in the evenings she would talk on the phone in the kitchen for a long time. Lowering her voice, I tried to eavesdrop, but she always fell silent when I appeared. Only once did I manage to catch a fragment of a phrase. Everything will be ready in a month. Ready what and by what month? Meanwhile, Mom became increasingly anxious. She noticed that Susan was constantly examining documents that were in Mom's dresser. When Mom made a remark, my mother-in-law replied that she was just tidying up. Lizzie, hide all original papers in a safe deposit box. Mom advised me, let's leave only copies at home. I don't like how she's behaving. On Saturday, something happened that finally opened my eyes to Susan's plans. David had gone to the gym. I was at work. I had a shift. And Mom was home alone with my mother-in-law. I returned earlier than usual. A colleague got sick, and I was let go. I went up to the third floor and was already taking out my keys when I suddenly heard Susan's voice from behind the door. She was on the phone. And her voice was completely different. Harsh. Businesslike. No, Ginny, everything's going according to plan. Just a little more, and the problem with the invalid will solve itself. I froze with the keys in my hand. Of course, I understand it's cruel, my mother-in-law continued. But what can I do? She's in the way. Can you imagine what a great apartment I'll get? A 3-bedroom in the center. And that cripple just spoils the whole look. I felt sick. She was talking about my mom. About how Mom was in the way. Ginny, I told you, there are good private homes for people like that. With care, with doctors, she'll be better off there than here. And the apartment will be free. I quietly turned the key in the lock and carefully opened the door slightly. No, David doesn't know anything yet. Susan whispered, but I'm working on it. I've already found documents. Interesting papers. Something Lizzie is hiding from her son. Documents? What documents? No, not the will. It's something else. Something about money the old lady spent. David will be shocked when he finds out the truth. My heart was pounding wildly. What money was my mother-in-law talking about? And what had she found in Mom's papers? All right, Ginny, let's talk later. I think someone's here. I quickly closed the door and pretended I was just approaching the apartment. Then I greeted loudly and entered. Susan was sitting in the kitchen with an innocent look, flipping through a magazine. Ah, Lizzie, early today. Yes, they let me go early. Where's Mom? Sleeping, probably tired. I went into Mom's room. She was indeed lying on the bed, but not sleeping. Her eyes were open. Mom, how are you? Fine, honey, just a headache. But from her face, I could see something had happened. Mom looked upset and anxious. Mom, what happened? Mom looked back at the door. Then quietly said, Lizzie, your mother-in-law was rummaging through my documents. I saw her. She thought I was asleep. But she was taking a folder with papers out of the dresser. And what was she looking for in there? I don't know, but when I stirred, She quickly shoved everything back and pretended to be tidying up. In the evening, when David came home, I didn't tell him about the overheard conversation. I needed to first figure out exactly what his mother had found in Mom's documents. But Susan got ahead of me. "David," she said at dinner, "I need to talk to you. Alone." They went into the room and closed the door. I stayed with Mom in the kitchen, and we both strained to listen to the muffled voices. First, my mother-in-law spoke for a long time, agitatedly. Then David asked some questions. Then my mother-in-law again. Half an hour later, the door opened, and David came out. His face was strange, surprised, and bewildered. "Lizzie, can I talk to you for a minute?" We went into the living room. David sat on the couch and rubbed his forehead. "Listen, Mom said a strange thing about your mom. About the will." "What exactly?" "She says there are some inaccuracies in the documents. That Aunt Clara bequeathed the apartment not only to your mom, but also to someone else. And your mom knows about it, but is hiding it." I was confused. Mom never told me anything like that. "David, this is nonsense. Mom showed me the will. Everything is clear there, but Mom says she saw other papers about part of the money Aunt Clara left being misused." "What money?" I didn't understand. "That's what's strange. It turns out, besides the apartment, Aunt Clara also left money. Quite a large sum, but that money disappeared somewhere." My head was spinning. Was Mom really hiding something? Or was this another intrigue of Susan? "David, let's ask Mom directly. Mom says, better not to ask, so as not to put your mom in an awkward position. But she advises to check the documents carefully anyway." I looked at my husband and didn't recognize him. Did he really believe his mother? Did he really think my mom was capable of deception? "David, you understand that your mother just wants to cause a quarrel between us." "Lizzie, what do quarrels have to do with it? We're talking about documents, about the legality of owning the apartment. So you doubt that the apartment belongs to my mom?" David hesitated. "I don't doubt it. I just think everything needs to be checked. You never know." There it was. Susan had achieved her goal. She had sown doubt in her son's mind. Now he would think that we were hiding something. That night I didn't close my eyes, tossing and turning on the couch, wondering what to do next. Susan was clearly preparing some kind of blow, and that blow would be aimed at my mother. In the morning, as soon as my mother-in-law went to the clinic, I went to Mom. "Mom, we need to talk seriously. David said there were some inaccuracies in the will about the money." "Is that true?" Mom sighed heavily. "Sit down, honey, I'll tell you." And then I learned the truth. Aunt Clara really left not only the apartment, but also money. Quite a large sum. About $70. Mom used this money for my education, for her prosthesis after the accident, and for medical treatment, and a part, about $10, she put aside for a rainy day. "But why didn't you tell me?" "Why would I?" Mom was surprised. "The money was spent on necessary things. What difference does it make where it came from?" "Mom, but David thinks you're hiding something." "I'm not hiding anything. I just don't think it's necessary to report to anyone about how I spend Aunt Clara's inheritance." Formally, Mom was right, but Susan managed to present the case as if Mom had stolen or concealed something. "Lizzie, I understand what's happening," Mom said. "Your mother-in-law wants to get this apartment, and she'll do everything to drive us out of here. But how? The apartment is registered to you." "For now, yes, but if she proves that I spent the money improperly or that the will was drawn up incorrectly." Mom didn't finish, but I understood everything. Susan was preparing a lawsuit. She wanted to challenge the will. "Mom, who else had the right to Aunt Clara's inheritance?" "Formally, her brother, my Uncle Paul, but he died 10 years ago." "What about his children?" "He had a son, Robert, but they fell out long ago. Back in the 90s, Robert moved to another city, and family ties were severed. As far as I know, he doesn't even know about Aunt Clara's death. Or maybe he's not even alive anymore. We lost contact." There it was. Susan found Aunt Clara's nephew and is now trying to challenge the will through him. In the evening, I told David everything. He listened in silence, then sat for a long time, staring blankly. "You see, Lizzie, Mom is right about one thing. You should have told me about the money right away." "Why?" "Mom had every right to spend her inheritance on whatever she wanted. She did, but now the question might arise. Where are the documents confirming those expenses?" "David, are you also doubting my mom?" "I'm not doubting, but I understand that problems might arise." And then I realized, Susan had practically won. She managed to cause a rift between David and me. She made him doubt my mother's honesty. And the scariest thing was, I felt that this was just the beginning. Something much more serious lay ahead. The next day, while Mom was sleeping after lunch, Susan suddenly entered her room. I saw it by chance. I was passing by. My mother-in-law stood by the dresser and was writing something in a notebook. When she noticed me, she didn't even flinch. "Oh, Lizzie, I was just thinking, maybe I should help your mom sort out her documents. They're all jumbled up." "No need," I said coldly. "Mom will sort them out herself." Of course. I'm not insisting." But she didn't hide the notebook right away. And I managed to notice that dates and some numbers were written there. Document numbers. In the evening, I shared my suspicions with Mom. "Mom, she's planning something. Studying our documents. Writing down numbers." "I know," Mom said tiredly. "I've already moved all the original documents to the bank's safe deposit box. Let her look for copies." "What if she made copies?" "Then let her do whatever she wants. The apartment is still mine by law." But I saw Mom was also worried. Susan created an atmosphere of constant tension in the house. We all walked on eggshells, waiting for what she would pull next. Meanwhile, she continued to meet with her mysterious acquaintances. I saw her several more times. Sometimes with the realtor, sometimes with a man in glasses who looked like a lawyer. And then one day she came home with a triumphant look, humming something to herself, smiling mysteriously. "Any good news?" I couldn't help but ask. "Oh, just minor things," she replied. Some matters were resolved. And then she added, "Oh, by the way, Lizzie, are you planning to have a housewarming party? You've been living here for a month already. And you haven't invited any guests? Why do we need a housewarming party?" "Why, it's a tradition. New home, new friends. I'd be happy to help organize. I'd invite good people." Something sinister was in her voice. And I understood. She needed the housewarming for some reason. But why? "We'll think about it," I answered evasively. Think. Susan smiled. "But don't drag it out. Or people might find it strange that you're hiding." "Hiding? Hiding from whom?" In the evening, I told David about his mother's suggestion. "Maybe we should really have one?" He unexpectedly agreed. "We'll get to know the neighbors. Show the apartment to friends." "David, you don't understand. Your mother is up to something." "Lizzie, please stop," he said tiredly. "Mom just wants to throw a nice party. And you're looking for a catch in everything. What if I'm right? What if she's planning something against my mom? What could she plan in front of guests? Don't make up silly things." But I knew. It was precisely in front of guests that my mother-in-law planned to strike publicly, so that nothing could be denied afterwards. On the morning of the housewarming, Susan got up before everyone else and immediately set to work, arranging furniture, hanging up some decorations she had brought with her. By lunchtime, the apartment was unrecognizable, grand, festive, but somehow alien. "Beautiful," my mother-in-law said contentedly, looking at the result. "Now we can receive guests." Mom was gloomy and silent all day. I saw she also felt the approach of trouble. "Lizzie," she said quietly to me in the kitchen, "I have a bad feeling. Maybe we should cancel everything?" "Too late, Mom. Guests are already invited, but we'll be on our guard." By 6 p.m., I was dressed in my best dress. Severe but elegant. Mom also dressed up, though she moved with difficulty. Her leg ached after yesterday's long walk. "Maybe you should rest in your room?" I offered. "I'll greet the guests." "No," Mom said firmly. "This is my home, and I will be present." The first guests began to arrive promptly at 7. And it immediately became clear that something was wrong. Instead of David's colleagues and neighbors, some unfamiliar middle-aged people arrived. Men in expensive suits, women in fur vests. They greeted me politely, but distantly, and Susan as an old acquaintance. "Lizzie, meet," my mother-in-law introduced. "This is Mr. Thompson, an old friend of mine. And this is Mrs. Davis. We went to college together." But in the eyes of these people, I saw not friendly warmth, but some kind of business interest. They looked around the apartment with evaluating glances, quietly discussing something among themselves. "Excellent layout," Mr. Thompson said, "and high ceilings. That's valuable now." "Yes, the location is good," Mrs. Davis chimed in. "Center, transportation nearby." I started to feel uneasy. These people were talking about our apartment as if it were an item for sale. By 7:30, about 15 people had gathered. David tried to keep the conversation going, but it was clear he was also uncomfortable among these strangers. "Mom, where are my colleagues?" he quietly asked Susan. "You said you'd invite them." "David, they'll be here, don't worry." But no one else came. Instead, at 8 p.m., a new group of guests appeared. And then I finally realized. This was a trap. Among the newcomers was a man in his 60s with a folder of documents under his arm. He was accompanied by a young woman with a voice recorder. And behind them walked another stranger. Tall, thin, with piercing eyes. Susan greeted them especially warmly. Come in, come in. I'm so glad you could make it. The man with the documents walked straight up to me. Are you Elizabeth Miller? Yes. And who are you? Mr. Evans, lawyer. And this is my assistant, Ms. Green. We represent the interests of Mr. Peter Stone. He nodded at the tall man. Who is Peter Stone? I didn't understand. The nephew of the late Clara Stone. That is, your aunt. The ground slipped from under my feet. There it was. Susan had found the very nephew who had a right to the inheritance. You see, the lawyer continued, my client had been looking for traces of his relatives for a long time. He knew of his aunt's existence, but contact was lost many years ago. Only recently, through a private detective, he managed to find out that his aunt had died and left a will. We have reason to believe that the will was drawn up with violations. What violations? Mom intervened, rolling her wheelchair closer to us. The lawyer looked at her coldly. Firstly, my client, as the closest relative, had the right to a mandatory share. Secondly, there are questions about the monetary part of the inheritance. What are you talking about? Mom asked, but her voice trembled, about the fact that you spent money bequeathed along with the apartment without coordinating with other heirs. The guests fell silent, listening to the conversation. I saw curiosity and schadenfreude in their eyes. Susan, I turned to my mother-in-law. This is your doing. She didn't deny it. Lizzie, I just want everything to be fair. If there are other heirs, they have a right to know the truth. What truth? I flared. The apartment legally belongs to my mom. That still needs to be proven. The lawyer intervened. We filed a lawsuit in court to contest the will. Filed? I gasped. When? This morning. And now we are conducting an inspection of the disputed property in the presence of witnesses. I looked around at the guests and understood. That's why they were here. These weren't housewarming guests. These were witnesses for the court. David, I called my husband. Do you hear what's happening? David stood pale and bewildered. Mom, what have you done? David, I'm protecting the family's interests. Susan said hotly. They might take away our apartment. We need to act. I asked again. What, This is my mom's apartment. Are you sure? My mother-in-law squinted. Sure your mom told the whole truth? The lawyer took documents from his folder. We have evidence that the heiress spent over $80 from the bequeathed money without notifying other claimants to the inheritance. This is a violation of the law. Mom had the right to spend her money. I cried out. Not her own, but common. The lawyer corrected. By law, my client had a right to a quarter of the entire inheritance. Mom sat in her wheelchair, pale as a ghost. I saw it was a real blow for her. Ms. Miller, the lawyer addressed her. Are you prepared to voluntarily pay compensation to the legal heir? Or will the matter be decided in court? She doesn't have that kind of money. I interjected. Then part of the apartment can become compensation. The lawyer said unperturbed. Susan smiled triumphantly. Her plan had succeeded. She had publicly put us in an impossible situation. Well, Lizzie, she said sweetly. Now do you understand what position we're in? The apartment might be taken away. It might be taken away from my mom. I answered coldly. What do we have to do with it? What do we have to do with it? I'm thinking about the family's future. About David's future. My mother-in-law raised her voice. What future? The one where if the apartment is taken away, we'll have to live 3 people in a 2-bedroom again? Susan scanned the silent guests. And it's all because of your mom. Who hid the truth about the inheritance? Mom didn't hide anything. Nothing. My mother-in-law took some papers from her purse. What about this? Certificates of loans your mom took out. Mortgaging the apartment. It turns out she owed $20. I felt cold all over. Loans. What loans? Mom, is this true? I asked Mom. Mom sighed heavily. Lizzie, I wanted to tell you. After the accident I needed money for an expensive prosthesis and additional treatment that insurance didn't cover. And you mortgaged the apartment? Only part of the value. A small part. Susan nodded maliciously. See, David, your mother-in-law put the roof over our heads at risk. What if she can't pay off her debts? She can, Mom said firmly. What if she can't? My mother-in-law insisted. If the bank takes the apartment for debts, what then? Where will we live? The guests listened to this conversation with open mouths. Someone even recorded it on their phone. Susan, I said, trying to remain calm, what solution do you propose? My mother-in-law was delighted that I finally asked. Elementary. We need to protect the family from risks. How? Transfer the apartment to David's name. Or at least a share in it. So that in case of problems we have a guarantee? There it was. This is what she had been leading up to all along. She wanted Mom to sign the apartment over to David. What if Mom refuses? Then my mother-in-law made a theatrical pause. We need to think about other options. What options? Well, for example, Susan lowered her voice, but so that everyone could hear. There are good private homes for the elderly with medical care. For people with disabilities, this is an ideal option. I couldn't believe my ears. She was suggesting putting my mom in a nursing home in front of guests. What did you say? I asked again. I said the truth. Susan no longer hid her aggression. Your mother put the whole family at risk. She hid debts, spent other people's money, mortgaged the apartment, and now we all have to deal with her problems. This is her apartment. She had the right to do what she wanted. She did, and now let her face the consequences. My mother-in-law turned to the guests, as if seeking their support. Look at her, a disabled person who doesn't earn a penny, but managed to put the family on the verge of ruin. Mom sat with a stone face, but I saw her hands trembling. Susan, apologize immediately, I demanded. I won't, because I'm telling the truth. My mother-in-law finally snapped. Your disabled mother is just ruining our lives. Put her in a nursing home. Or I'll do it myself. The guests fell silent. A deathly silence hung in the apartment. Everyone looked alternately at the furious mother-in-law and at my mother in her wheelchair. And Mom slowly raised her head, looked at Susan, and calmly, but clearly, uttered 3 words. Get out of here. The guests gasped. My mother-in-law turned pale. What did you say? I said, get out of here. Mom repeated in the same calm tone. Out of my apartment immediately. How dare you? My mother-in-law shrieked. I live here. Lived? Mom corrected. You don't live here anymore. I walked up to Mom and stood next to her wheelchair. Mom is right. Susan, pack your bags and leave. David. My mother-in-law turned to her son. Do you hear how they're talking to your mother? David stood, shifting his gaze from his mother to my mom. Different emotions warred on his face. David, I said quietly, your mother publicly insulted my mom in her own home in front of strangers. Do you support this? David slowly shook his head. No, Mom, you've gone too far. David, but I'm protecting our interests. No, Mom, you're only protecting your own interests. David said tiredly, and you're doing it wrong. So you're choosing her? Susan asked, stunned. I'm choosing fairness and respect for elders. And you, Mom, have shown neither. My mother-in-law looked around at the guests in confusion, as if seeking support, but they remained silent, some even looking away. Fine, she shrieked. Wonderful, you're throwing your mother out of the house. But you'll regret it. I'll get what I want through court. Try it, Mom said calmly. Just be aware, I also have a lawyer. And I know my rights. Susan furiously stormed into the room to pack her bags. The guests began to awkwardly say goodbye and disperse. The lawyer dryly said that we would see each other in court. And he too left. Half an hour later, only the 3 of us remained in the apartment. Susan, slamming the door loudly, disappeared with 2 suitcases. Mom, I said to Mom, you were magnificent. I'm just tired of enduring. Mom sighed. For 40 years I've tolerated all sorts of people who think that disabled people owe them something. David came up to us. Ms. Miller, please forgive my mother. She doesn't always know how to control herself. It's all right, David. The main thing is that you understood who was right and who was wrong. But the joy of victory was short-lived. 2 days later, we received official notification from the court. Susan filed 3 lawsuits at once, to challenge the will, to recover compensation for improperly spent money, and to declare the transactions with the apartment invalid. And a week later, it turned out that things were even worse. A bailiff came to us and delivered news that made my knees buckle. You have a problem here, he said, examining the documents. Your apartment has been seized by court order. Seized? I didn't understand. Prohibition on sale, gifting, and any operations with real estate until the court decision. But we're not going to sell. It doesn't matter. There's a statement that you might flee with money from the sale. Who filed this statement? Miss Susan Crawford as an interested party. Mom sank heavily into the armchair. Lizzie, she's blocked us. Now we can't do anything with the apartment. But it's your property. Formally yes, but in fact, until the court sorts it out, we are in limbo. In the evening, another blow came. David called and said he found a strange document in his papers. Lizzie, in my folder there's some kind of power of attorney from your mom in your name, giving you the right to dispose of the apartment. What power of attorney? Mom didn't give me any power of attorney. But is it her signature? My heart sank to my heels. A forged power of attorney with my mom's signature. But when? And most importantly, why? Mom and I rushed to David. He showed the document. And indeed, it looked very similar to my signature. But I knew for sure. I didn't sign it. David, this is a forgery. Are you sure? Absolutely. Mom would have told me if she had issued a power of attorney for the apartment to me. But where did it come from in my documents? And then it dawned on me. Susan. She had access to copies of documents when she lived with us. She could have forged Mom's signature, created a fake power of attorney, and planted it in David's documents. David, this is your mother's doing. But why would she need a fake power of attorney? To then state in court that I abused Mom's trust, that I illegally disposed of her property with a fake power of attorney. The next day, the lawyer Mom found came to us. A young but sharp guy named Andrew. He studied all the documents and shook his head. The situation is complicated. Your opponent prepared well. What can she achieve? Mom asked. In the best case for her, the will be declared partially invalid. Then the nephew will receive a quarter of the apartment. And in the worst case, the will be completely revoked and the apartment will be returned to the inheritance mass. Then it will be divided among all heirs. So my mom might lose her home? She might, especially if they prove that she abused her rights as an heir. I felt like the world was crumbling. Could Susan really take our apartment away? What about the forged power of attorney? That's a separate case. We need to file a complaint about document forgery. But it will be difficult to prove. The expert examination will show that the signature is forged. But direct evidence of who exactly did it is needed. We left the lawyer's office dejected. Susan turned out to be more cunning and treacherous than we thought. Mom, what if we lose the case? Then we'll have to live somewhere else. Mom said sadly. But you know what, Lizzie? I don't regret kicking her out. Better to lose the apartment than to lose dignity. But that's unfair. Justice and law are different things. Daughter. Unfortunately, the court date was set for 3 months later. And in the meantime, we lived on a volcano. At any moment a decision could come about eviction or about dividing the apartment. David was no less worried than we were. He understood that his mother had acted meanly. But he couldn't change anything anymore. Lizzie, he said one evening, if we lose the case, I'll rent a place for us. I won't leave you and your mom on the street. David, but it will be hard for the 3 of us on your salary. Hard, but not impossible. The main thing is that we'll be together. And you know what? At that moment, I realized, my husband had still chosen the right side. Even if we lose the apartment, we won't lose each other. And Susan, she got what she wanted. A war. But the victory in this war went to us. Because we remained human, and she showed her true face to the whole world. And now, 8 months after that housewarming, I can say, yes, we lost the apartment. Aunt Clara's nephew received his legal quarter. We had to sell the property and pay off the debts. We rent a 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts and live modestly. But Mom is still with us. And David is still my husband. And Susan, she got what she wanted. We no longer live in that beautiful apartment in the city center. But she didn't return there either. Because we all moved out. Justice is a strange thing. Sometimes it comes not in the form you expect. But it still comes.